Welcome back to the Go Have Good Sex podcast, the show where faith and pleasure finally stop fighting. I'm Angela, the Christian sexpert, sex coach, truth teller, and your new favorite bedtime devotional. If you're ready to go deeper, check out my resources for couples and individuals, from my free 15-minute coaching consults to spicy but faith-friendly resources like the Marriage Playdate, to my Patreon, where I teach you all the things your church aunties never told you about. And yeah, you know I've got it covered with merch, journals, bookmarks, and everything in between at thechristiansexpert.com. So whether you're here to learn, to heal, or to spice things up with scripture and sass, I'm your girl, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into today's episode, and remember, go have good sex. Welcome back to Go Have Good Sex. I'm Angela, the Christian sexpert, and one of the pillars of my work is the 13 types of intimacy. You guys have probably heard me talk about it. There's 13 different types of intimacy that we can experience in marriage. Sex is only one of them. And today we are focusing on crisis intimacy, the way that you and your spouse hold on to each other when life turns upside down. Few things test a marriage like grief. Whether it's the death of a loved one, the loss of a dream, or even the quiet grief of unmet expectations, loss has a way of shaking not just our faith, but often the connection with people that we love the most. Crisis intimacy doesn't mean pretending the pain isn't there. It means learning how to lean in instead of pulling away. And the truth is, the best time to talk about crisis intimacy isn't when you're actively in the storm, but before and after it, so you're prepared to navigate the grief together. Today, my guest is Dr. Audrey Davidheiser. She's a licensed psychologist from California, certified internal family systems therapist, and IFSI approved clinical consultant. After founding a counseling center for the Los Angeles Dream Center, she now provides IFS therapy for trauma survivors, including those with religious trauma, and assists in IFS trainings. She has been a regular writer for crosswalk.com and a columnist for ibelieve.com. Her book on how IFS helps the grieving process, Grieving Wholeheartedly, was published by InterVarsity Press in July 2025. Today, Dr. Audrey and I are diving into how grief reshapes intimacy, how to support one another when you grieve differently, and how you can come out on the other side not only surviving, but more deeply connected. Let's get into it. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Yes. Oh gosh, so much. All right. So I want to quickly talk about when we think about grief, most people think of it in terms of death, like the death of a family member, but there's so many other things that we grieve in our lives. Can you provide some examples of what grief in other contexts would look like?
I will try my best doing that without triggering anybody, okay? But
I
if
do
somebody
want to, yeah, there is a trigger warning on
yeah.
like all of my content, but I will make
Mm,
sure that I put an extra one in the show notes. Just
okay.
um, with that said, my followers know that we talk about the hard stuff. So
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, I think about some of the grief that we kind of either try to forget or we just shove in the closet, like abortion or
mhm,
miscarriage, or how about someone who moved from one state to another and is really missing the home state? Or even, another example would be someone who moved from one country to another. Most, if not all, people I know who moved to America, for instance, wanted to come here because of the better opportunities. And so, if I'm just picturing a child that was moved from their country of origin to
yeah,
America and then missing home, missing food, missing the weather, missing whatever else, but then constantly was told, no, but you should be thankful because not everybody gets to live in America. Look at all the opportunities, look at all this stuff. And so that child might grow up with feeling of, oh, I should be thankful as opposed to, but I also grieve the loss of my homeland. So that could be another example. A divorce, separation, not even divorce. How about a breakup? Engagement that didn't go through, or just you had a boyfriend or a girlfriend that you thought this is it, this is Mr. Right, this is Miss Right, and that didn't pan out. So there's a lot of examples of grief that doesn't involve the death of a family member or a pet. See, that's another grief.
Oh, the last pet that we had was put me in bed for a few days
Mm.
that I lost. But also, I'm thinking that I have had friendships where I have
Mm.
grieved the loss or the change in the status
Mhm.
of a friendship. Someone that I thought I could trust with, you know, deep sort of marriage stuff,
Mhm.
reacted completely out of left field, and that left me feeling distrustful of the entire relationship. And that was a form of grief of, you know, I really thought I could trust this person, but guess not. And I think a lot of that goes unrecognized
Mhm.
or it catches people unexpectedly. Yes. So you're uh, bearing in mind that not all grief is in the form of death, but we are talking about focusing a little more on the loss of grief as far as death and things like that in today's episode. Your book talks about how the internal family systems method of therapy can help people overcome grief. And so can you briefly tell our listeners what IFS is?
Yeah, if any of your listeners watch Inside Out or the sequel from Pixar, that animation, yeah,
Yes.
it's basically that idea of every one of us has parts inside of our soul, and it does not make you crazy. Doesn't mean that you have dissociative identity disorder. It just means you're a human being. And so the reason I think parts work is helpful when we talk about grief is because if you have grief, I think you would recognize this. Sometimes you would feel angry, other times you would feel really sad, other times you would be so missing the person that you lost. Other times it'd be like regret. Why didn't I spend more time? These are all different parts of you that get activated when grief happens. So with internal family system therapy, it helps us understand each of these parts and what they need from us when they're grieving.
Okay. So we made it two questions in, and I'm already going to go off script. But
Okay.
when you talk about inside out, and we all have these different parts inside of us that really need integrated. My immediate because I turn everything back to sex. That's my job. Um, but my first thought is I get questions all the time from
Mm.
women about how am I supposed to, be a freak in the sheets and holy, outside the
Mm.
bedroom. And like these two parts feel so in opposition to each other. Especially if someone has come out of purity culture and has that sort of
Mhm.
purity culture trauma. So if someone is feeling that sort of profound, stark contrast of I don't know how to be holy in the streets and a freak in the
Mm.
sheets, and I don't know how to be both of those things. Do you think internal family systems would be a good modality for them to pursue?
Absolutely. I would say, unless there's proof otherwise, I would guess that the one that feels like they have to be holy is a part. And then the one
Hmm.
that says that you have to be a freak in the sheets is also a part. And
Hmm.
I would recommend women like that to introduce these two parts to each other and say, hey, gals, guess what? You both live in my soul, right? So rather than like, well, I want to be this way, I don't know how to be, let's talk, let's hold hands, let's say, okay, you introduce yourself, what do you do? How do you behave when you go out in the your market? And when you are in bed, what would you like to do? So have them talk with you being there as a referee, introduce them to each other, say, we all need to work together because we're one person still. With these many different parts, we're still one person.
I love that so much. Okay. I'm going to bring it back to what I actually said that we were going to talk about. But I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds like it would be such a great modality for my followers who approach, because I get that question all the time. So, so when we think about uh, grief and crisis, and one of the things that I'm teaching is that a crisis should bring a couple closer together. But we actually, I think it's really common for couples to disconnect during times of crisis and grief.
Mhm.
So how do you see couples, like what does that practically look like if that disconnection?
Yeah. To weather through the disconnection, right? That's the
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like uh, so when one of the things that I aim to do with the podcast is sort of break down bigger ideas that
Mm.
professional people will talk about. Like one therapist to another will use, really big words, but
Uh-huh.
people don't, like, the everyday person is like, I don't know what that means. I don't feel like I see that showing up in my life. But like practical examples of what disconnection between a husband and wife would look like, so that if they start to recognize those things in their own marriage during a time of crisis or grief, that they can say, oh, this is what's happening. This is a problem that we may want to address.
Got it. So let's just create a fictitious couple. And let's say the wife is grieving, say, her best friend from college who died from breast cancer. And her husband comes home, honey, I'm home, and she's not like happy, she's not smiling. What's wrong? Okay, so and so died. Okay. Oh, okay, I'm so sorry about that. And then the next day, same thing happens. She's still not happy, not cheerful, but he brings her flowers this time. And she's again not appreciating that gesture. The disconnect could be he's thinking, here I am going out of my way, showing you, hey, here's a bouquet of flowers, and you're icing me out. And she's thinking, this is day two. My best friend just died yesterday. Can't you show some more sensitivity? But this is not spoken necessarily. They're just thinking about it. But if they don't talk and connect over what happened, then it could build to the next day. He might come home and I don't know, he could be upset at her to begin with. He could feel like, okay, I better get some service around here or else. But that's one way of disconnection because they don't talk about how meaningful this death is for the wife. Whereas he might think, oh, that's your best friend from college. We're now in our 40s or 50s or 60s and not realizing that maybe the death is very meaningful beyond what he thinks.
I think that's really profound. I think about the way that, like, family of origin plays into so many layers of our lives and our marriage that we don't really consciously think about family of origin playing into, because my family of origin handled death and grief in one way, but my husband's family of origin
Mm.
had a different sort of way of handling that. And so in your scenario with that couple, if her family of origin was just more quiet and reserved and withdrawn, and his was more of a leaning in, um rehashing every moment sort of family, then if that's really the first time that they've experienced that, encountering that for the first time without having discussed before, how did your family handle these sorts of things, can be a real shock for a lot of couples.
Yeah. And so if so I'm wanting to differentiate grief that happens because one of the spouses lost someone special versus if the couple lost a child together.
Yeah,
That's a whole different ball game, right?
absolutely.
So yeah, so let's stick with the first scenario. One of the spouses is grieving some loss. It would be nice if the non-grieving spouse is there and say, hey, like maybe in this scenario, we've never talked about our family of origin, how we handle grief. Hey, I just want you to know I'm here for you. And I don't know how that might look, but if you feel like you can talk to me, if you want me to, I'll just sit with you, or you can ask me questions, or you can ask me to distract you. We can talk about whatever you need, but I just want you to know I'm here for you. That would be nice. That's a way of inroad to tell the grieving spouse I'm not alone in this, even if my spouse may not 100% understand what I'm going through.
Yeah, I really love that. So if one of those spouses, they're the way that they have seen grieving modeled and have normalized it in their lives is for self isolation.
Mm.
How can the spouses balance that individual's like space for processing their need for isolation while also maintaining a solid connection in the marriage?
Great question. And right off the bat, I just want to acknowledge I have a part that is pro marriage. And so for this part, the most important thing is for the couple to fight for that marriage, no matter what kind of season in life they go through, including grief. So in that scenario, if one spouse tends to withdraw and isolate himself or herself, um, if that becomes a pattern, so the other spouse is noticing this, with a lot of sensitivity, with a lot of prayer too, just the other spouse, the one that's not grieving, maybe can approach the grieving spouse and say, "Hey, I noticed that you've been like withdrawing a lot, and that kind of hurts me a little bit. And I know you're dealing with a lot. May I just ask you to remind yourself I'm a resource. I really want to be with you through this time too. So I don't want to push my way. I don't want to intrude, but could you just give me some kind of signal if it feels like it's okay for me to sit next to you?" I don't like just sit. We'll just sit. We don't have to talk. We'll just like skin to skin. Not even romantic, nothing sexy, just skin to skin. I just want to be with you. Is that okay? And then if the one that's isolated says, "I don't know, that's too much to ask." Okay, I get that. What would be okay for you in this moment in time so that you can still do your grieving alone if that feels suitable for you? But I don't feel like I lost my spouse because I really want to be there with you, really, through thick and thin. So in other words, I'm advocating for both of them to negotiate back and forth to where there seems to be an activity that both spouses feel tolerable for this moment. You know what? Next week we may have to negotiate again because, as you know, the nature of grief is it's up and it's down and it's up again and it's really really down. So we may have the same talk again and again. But that's what marriage is, right? It's always constantly checking in with you. How are you doing? I didn't like it when you said this. Oh, I'm sorry about that. So with grief, it's just we'll just add an extra layer of sensitivity, knowing that everybody grieves differently, and I would argue every part grieves differently as well.
Ooh, can you talk more about that? Every part grieves differently.
Yeah. So for me, I lost my dad unexpectedly 7 years ago, and everybody's got thinking parts. That's the parts of us that think and analyze and figure things out. So my thinking part was affected in that I remember in the first few weeks after his death, I couldn't retain information. I couldn't read beyond one verse of scripture, even though daily Bible reading has been a habit for years and years. But I could only read one Bible verse a day. And if you asked me, "Audrey, what did you just read?" I would not have been able to tell you because I couldn't retain it. That's how my thinking part was affected. Like it was like a giant thief. All the information just kind of fell through. But for my younger part, this is interesting, I think. But one younger part in particular kept saying this to me. "Oh, yes, you watch, he'll come back." And I'm like, "That's weird. I know my dad died." But after time, continued to pass, and I kept hearing this from the younger part, "Just you watch, he'll come back." I realized what had happened was that when I was younger, there was a period in my time that both my parents had to leave me to be with my grandparents. And it took like maybe 3 months before my dad picked me up. But by the time that happened, I had already forgotten him because when I was little, we didn't have camera phones. We didn't have nothing of that. So the little me had forgotten him to the point that it took him 30 minutes to sing to me. And finally, my little me was like, "Oh, this is my dad." Um, and so based on that experience, that little Audrey tells me, "Well, he was gone too for 3 months. And then he came back. So he's going to come back. Just you watch." And she was very optimistic at first. But then, of course, I had to have a talk with her and say, "Darling, this is different. Basically, this time it is, permanent. And we'll see him again, but just not the side of heaven." So for that little me, the grief was different. For the part of me that was shocked, it was like, "Whoa, why didn't God tell me this so that I could pray about it ahead of time?" So that's what I mean. Parts of me grieve differently. Not every part of me needed to cry, but certainly some parts did.
I That's really profound. And I'm thinking about how because when we think about intimacy and when we frame intimacy as into me you see, I can't help but thinking that it has to be easier for couples to sort of show one part. to their spouse but hold others back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like maybe it was easier for you to tell your husband, I just can't seem to, I have the memory of a goldfish right now, right? I can't remember anything right now. Help me, help make me lists, help me, support me in that. But maybe I don't know, but maybe it felt too vulnerable to show
Mm-hmm.
that little Audrey, to your husband, because I think that showing different when we frame it as into me you see, there's sort of different levels and layers to that
Yeah.
feel more risky to share.
Yes.
um and I think, especially in a crisis, in a grieving episode, when everything else feels so even more uncertain and you're feeling even more vulnerable than you do on a daily basis, how can couples sort of acknowledge that I don't feel like I sense like you're holding something back, like, or even acknowledging for themselves that, they're not feeling super safe to share all of those parts. Like, how can couples navigate that?
Yeah. Again, another good question. I think the the good rule of thumb to walk away with is whoever, like, I was gonna say whoever's grieving more. In a sense, like, again, if one of the spouses maybe said lost a mother, then of course the other spouse lost someone too, like a mother-in-law, but that's different than losing your mom, right? So that's what I mean. Whoever feels like, well, this is a
Mhm.
closer relationship to me, then the other spouse, ideally anyway, would be there patiently saying, how can I be a resource? Let's talk about how I can support you during this grief, even though the other spouse is also grieving, obviously, because it's a loss of a mutual family member. So um, I think what would be best is if they keep coming back to this notion that we are yoked together, we are one flesh. So even though your expression of grief is different than mine, I want to be there for you if you can help direct me. Because sometimes, like you said, I don't always see the parts of you that are evident. Maybe what I see is just the withholding part. And I can sense that things are like hazy, there's things building up. And is it okay if I ask? Hey, are you okay? Because I feel like you're holding things back. Would you be okay? Would you not be offended if I say that? And presuming the spouse says, no, I'm not going to be offended. Okay, great. And then the spouse that lost, that close person, um, could possibly say in return, but if I'm not ready to reveal more information, are you going to be offended? Then hopefully the other spouse says, okay, I won't be offended as long as it's not like an affair or something. But then because grief is a time when emotions are really high. Just if I can, I'm just gonna ask the person who's grieving less, just to put it succinctly, to just be patient because it is hard. When you're grieving, feelings can fly all over the place. So just give a lot of forgiveness and grace to your grieving spouse. But to the one that is grieving that loss, I also want to ask. I know it feels like your world is crashing down. I get that. But just remember the spouse that you have is not a garbage can either. You need to connect with that spouse. You need to be able to say something like, I don't know, like, if you see me crying, don't say calm down. That's one of my pet peeves. Don't say, yes, just let me be.
My Mine is, God has never let us down before. My husband, like, that's one of my husband's go-tos when, like, during a crisis, and it just it I know, but I just need to freak out, okay?
Exactly. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
let me
So
be
it takes
dramatic
two.
for 5 minutes.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. But I feel like I answered that like in a roundabout way. Did I make myself clear
Yeah,
though?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We've kind of been focusing on, like, if one spouse is grieving more, like a loss of a friend, a loss of a parent. But what if the situation is something where it's kind of more of an equal footing, where it kind of affected them equally, like maybe
Yeah.
there's a house fire, or
Yeah.
like loss of a child or something like that. Do you do you do things change at all in that sort of situation?
Yeah. The danger there is that the spouse can have parts that accuse each other. If you
Mhm.
have turned off the stove If you had watched Junior, he would not have drowned. If you had
Hmm.
provided more, then it becomes like a
Right.
battle, right? Yeah. So in situations like that, I definitely want to recommend therapist intervention because that seems very hostile. It can escalate in a matter of seconds. And also, so we need to kind of delve into this a little bit more. There are protector parts and there are exiles. Protector parts include managers and firefighters. And these are the parts that appear to be strong. These are the parts that typically get riled up in arguments and confrontations. But beneath these protective parts are the exiles. So let's say again, Junior drowned in the pool. There could be. I'm not saying there will always be, but there could be. Both parents would have protective parts that blame the other for not doing a good enough job. But underneath that is deep, deep loss. And also fear. Like, was it my fault? I wasn't a good enough parent. That's why my child died. So the if we could if there's a button we could just press and we could get to the bottom line, it's that guilt and it's that fear that we need to tap into. We can't get there as long as the protectors are still pointing fingers saying, well, you're lousy because of X, Y, and Z. And then, of course, the comeback is going to be as vicious, if not more. So the point is, if there's a mutual loss like that, please seek professional help. And also remember, underneath all the finger pointing and the hot energy and the blaming this and that is probably very, fear, guilt, regret, and deep, deep sense of loss, possibly even shame.
I was going to ask about shame, because, when we're talking about slinging accusations and, the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, there has to be a lot of shame associated, like if one of them was supposed to be watching and, turned around for 30 seconds because we're human, there's got to be a lot of shame. And also on the other side of, I should have been out there instead of in the house grabbing the,
Right.
burgers for the grill. And yeah, I see how shame plays a huge role in that. So when moving on a little bit, one of, as I said earlier in the show, one of the pillars of my work is that sex is supposed to be the overflow of intimacy that you've established before you've ever reached the bedroom.
Uh-huh.
Um, However, grief does funny things to our libidos. Bearing in
Right.
mind, the other pillar of my work, that healthy women slash people, healthy people in safe marriages don't turn down good sex for no reason. And so we can wind up in a situation where some people may completely eschew sex at all, like even if the non-sexual intimacy remains very strong, while others may turn hypersexual. Do you think either reaction there is normal, or is that something that a couple should be concerned about?
I would say it's not up to me, it's up to the couple. So in the sense of if there's a wife or a husband who doesn't have libido anymore, so they don't want to do anything sexual, then
Mhm.
communication is key again. It would be nice if the couple can talk about how, for one of them, sex is just not even on the menu, for the foreseeable future. And how is that for the other spouse? And the other spouse probably will say, I don't like it, or, oh, well, but it's really important to keep, touching, uh, keep touch base, right? Yeah. Every so often and say, okay, how about, I mean, not in a like, oh, how about now? How about, I really, not that. Again, going back to grief is really a period of turmoil, of highs and lows and ups and downs. So hopefully the couple have enough patience for each other and the differences in their body physiology as a woman and a man, that it would be okay to wait it out and see. Maybe after a year things could be different. I'm not saying not to have sex in a year or so, but I'm just saying it's different
Right.
from couple to couple. The key is conversation. The same goes with the hypersexuality. Again, presuming that it happens, it's contained within the marriage, then it's up to the spouses. Can you do this? More often than not, because it seems like this is what my body needs. And if the spouse says, well, I don't know, that seems like a lot. Okay, what can you do? Again, going back to that negotiation, because if we are one flesh and we're one in God's eyes, even though the expression of grief is different, but we're responsible to take care of each other's needs. I'm not just my own needs anymore. I need to take care of my husband's needs and so on and so forth. So just because the other side of this is that just because you're grieving and it is a huge emotional task, don't think that the world stops because you're grieving. It doesn't. It really doesn't. People still have their needs and they still have their wants. So it would be nice, ideally, if a couple could really just talk about their sexual needs in this moment. Not just in the moment, I would just say in this season.
I do want to, knowing my audience and some of the bad theology that a lot of my
Mm,
audience has been exposed to, I do want to issue a caution that if in this season you find that you yourself or your spouse have swung to the sort of hypersexual end of the pendulum, um, if at any point you or your spouse feels used
mm,
or that sex has become a maladaptive coping mechanism to avoid dealing with the grief or avoid dealing with the yucky feelings of grief, please get help immediately from a trained therapist, because it is, especially if there's a history of sexual issues in the marriage, it can be really easy to slip back into using sex as an unhealthy coping tool. Um, but also, I believe that sex can be incredibly life affirming in a season of grief. And, like you said, it really, you have to be aware of the couple's dynamics to know. But I know that there's been a lot of bad theology with, in terms of that. So I like to put that caution out there. So, with that said, when I'm coaching couples with developing personal intimacy plans, one of the things that I say when we are discussing crisis intimacy is that you should discuss crisis intimacy when you're not in a crisis. That
yeah,
it's really hard to discuss the crisis intimacy when you're in the middle of the storm. It's kind of like
yeah,
trying to build a boat in the middle of an ocean. However,
yeah.
best laid plans and all of that. So, do you have tips for how couples can discuss navigating crisis and grief when they're in the middle of the storm?
Yeah, I think going back to what I said before, there are protector parts and there are exiles. So if the couple is aware enough to know that, let's see, what would be a good example? That one spouse just doesn't feel like connecting because this loss is a fresh reminder of whatever, something bad that happened in childhood. It would be nice if that spouse can reveal that so that the other person doesn't think I'm being rejected or this is a punishment or this is something I did. No, no, this is something that happened to them years ago. Doesn't really have anything to do with me. It's just that the loss is a fresh reminder of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I think the taking everything as a personal rejection is an issue that I see a lot in a lot of couples. That it truly, your spouse has their own internal world, and it doesn't have anything to
Right,
do with you. Um,
right.
do you have any suggestions if someone is navigating that dynamic where um, one spouse is taking things really personally when it just really doesn't have anything to do with them? Do
You
you have
can
any
use
good
the parts
suggestions for
language.
that?
Yeah, you could use the parts language and just say, really, this is about my part. This really isn't about your parts. And I hear that you're saying, but there's a part of you that takes it as like, I'm rejecting you. I get that. But can I just impress upon you? This is really about my part. Like if you remove this experience from my childhood or from my past, like you just somehow have big scissors and you can just cut it, I would not be reacting this way. So
That's
the emphasis on this is just a part of me. This is not the whole of me trying to tell you I hate you and I'm rejecting you. This is not it.
that's good. One of the things that my husband and I, so we've been married for 22 years, we have navigated the death of both sets of grandparents for us.
Mm.
And his grandparents actually died within, I don't know, 2 or 3 days of each other.
Wow.
Double funeral, and all of that. And walking through all of that made us both realize that, oh, that experience when it was my grandparents, when it was his grandparents, and even we lost his grandparents coming off the tails of losing my grandfather, and that really made us more cognizant of a lot of triggers coming up for both of us from our childhoods because of being
Mhm.
around all of the family and for
Mhm.
the funerals and the hospital visits and family behavior,
Yeah.
navigating before the deaths happened and things like that. And we had to start being even more careful to not unintentionally trigger each other as we were walking through those things. So, do you have any tips for helping couples not when all of this external stuff is happening? Um, how do they remain mindful of each other's triggers,
Mhm.
or how do they like repair if they do accidentally trigger each other?
So let's do the first part of the question first, which is how can couples keep from unintentionally triggering each other? Um, so in
Hmm.
internal family systems, we have a concept that's called self with capital S. And I see self as what the Bible says spirit, and our spirit has the Holy Spirit living in our spirit, right? So in my experience, the only possibility that we get triggered is if somebody else's heart shows up and speaks and blends with them, shows up and says something maybe insensitive or off-putting in any way. But if we show up as ourselves, chances are we won't trigger somebody else. And if we do unintentionally trigger somebody else, it would be an easy fix because we would be quick to say, I'm so sorry. Because in our spirit, again, lives the Holy Spirit who is gentle, who is, easy to want to repair things. So one key would be just to be in yourself because if you are always living with fear that you might trigger your spouse or you're feeling like you're walking on eggshells or you're feeling like no matter what you say, it's always wrong, those are circumstances that would easily make you say something wrong that would then trigger your spouse. But if you kind of, those are the parts, by the way, the feeling like I'm walking on eggshells, or whatever I say is going to be wrong anyway, or what kind of mood is this spouse going to be? All those are parts of me that have those thoughts. So if I ask these parts, please give me space on the inside. Don't hijack me. Let me be Audrey when I come home, when I be with my spouse. Chances are it would be myself that shows up, and that however my spouse behaves, myself can handle that, because myself is like it's like having Jesus walk around in your house. I can't picture Jesus being offended, right? Maybe by religious leaders, but not by human suffering. I'm not gonna be offended by that. So that's the first answer to your question. Should I pause before we go to the second answer?
No, go for it. Yeah, dive in.
Okay. So then, what would happen if you unintentionally trigger your spouse? Um, I'm guessing that there will be some signs, right? The spouse might bark in anger or might say, "Well, there you go again, not minding your own business." Some indication. Okay, there's
Hmm.
some rupture here. Then hopefully again, it won't incite the part of me that wants to defend me. Why I didn't know, or no, you took it wrong. I meant this, and then you took it that. Remember again, grief is a time of intense emotions. So if the response from one spouse is already anger or accusatory, then it would be best at that moment, if I can, to make a U-turn, what we call a U-turn, which is okay, pause, breathe deeply from my belly, and ask all parts of me that want to blend, that want to be like one with me, just give me lots of space so Audrey, myself, can handle this confrontation. Because if it's myself that shows up, I can stay calm and confident and curious and compassionate both. And I could like be with my spouse and see things from his perspective more so than, but I was right. And you just didn't take me the right way, because if I respond that way, then as you know, it's just going to escalate matters. And then there goes the repair, right? So I have to be the one that says, okay, with myself, let me find myself first, have all my parts in a step back so I can approach this matter calmly and compassionately.
So, what I'm hearing is don't jump immediately to defending yourself, but rather lead with curiosity and, asking them, oh my gosh, that was a really big reaction. And help me understand why. the reaction
Sure.
was so big and that's one of the things that I teach often is you can almost never go wrong when you lead with curiosity when
Yes,
talking to your spouse is
absolutely. Yeah,
no matter
yeah,
what we're talking about bedroom conflict crisis. I
true.
can't honestly think of a I'm sure a commenter will find a time to tell me that it's inappropriate to lead with curiosity. And people derive great joy from letting me know I'm wrong. Um, okay. So, how do couples know when they need some more support than just the two of them? How do they know when they need to seek the support of a therapist or a grief counselor or something like that? And what should they look for in a therapist if this is the sort of season that they're in?
Yeah, so the first part of your question, how will couples know? I think if they don't see eye to eye, they fight a lot. There's maybe one spouse tries to establish communication lines, and the other is just withdrawing and rejecting, and even worse, treating the other one with contempt, disdain. Oh, that's a killer. But if this continues and it becomes a pattern, it feels like there is no way in. Then I would strongly recommend seeing a therapist. If there's a violent death, that's definitely a good reason to see a therapist. The death of a child, even if it's not violent, if it's cancer, we kind of see the end coming. It's still a huge loss if a child, it dies because it's against what's expected, right? Grandparents should die first, then parents, then the children. So yeah, if that happens, I definitely want to recommend that. If multiple losses, like you mentioned, a house, if the couple lost a house, then the pet also died in the fire. Then, the husband lost his job. Oh boy, please do seek some help.
Yeah, definitely. So, what should they look for when they're looking for a therapist to support them through this sort of situation?
Because I'm an IFS therapist and I have seen the power of IFS, I would say IFS therapy for sure. And, there's many different IFS therapists just all around America and Canada too. So that would be my first answer.
How do they find a therapist who practices IFS?
Go to the IFS Institute. I think it's ifs-institute.com, but don't quote me on that. I just Google IFS Institute; it'll kind of pop up, and then they have a directory.
Great. Um, and then if someone is walking through a season and they're like, oh, I really like the way that Audrey addressed things and I would like to have her as my therapist, um, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, so I have to kind of answer, but with also a caveat. I can only see people who reside in California, so that's
Yes.
that's the only thing. But they can also buy my book if they don't reside in California, because my book is like therapy in a book. It's not just me telling you about what IFS is or how it's helpful. There's also sections that are dedicated to. It's almost like you're in my office and I'm asking you these prompts, and you work with your internal system. So that's another option. And the book is on Amazon, Grieving Wholeheartedly. But we can also go to my website.
So, can a couple go through the book together, or is it really more for just an individual?
I think I would recommend one book per individual because of what you said earlier. I don't want to assume that all couples have the same background, but let's say there's a couple that went through infidelity. Maybe one of the spouses cheated on the other, and so for the one that was cheated on, it's still kind of tender area to show this younger vulnerable parts to the partner that cheated in the past, right? So if that kind of couple uses the book together, then hey, then the other couple can see every single part that the one that was cheated on
Mhm.
has, and that feels unsafe to me.
That's a great caveat. Thank you for putting that out there. Do you have any last thoughts that you would like to leave people with?
Your audience is married people, correct?
Yes. Yep.
And I'm for marriage, and I'm married myself, so I know that being married is tough work, but especially if you are grappling with grief of any kind. So I just want to say, keep fighting together, not keep fighting each other. Let's fight together. And even if it's hard, keep those communication lines open, kind of keep negotiating, kind of like what I said before. Oh, good thing I remember this. Please interpret for each other what gestures mean, because even words can mean differently, for one spouse to another. But gestures like, okay, you just got me a box of chocolates. It's not Valentine's Day. What does this mean? Because I might assign meaning to it that my spouse thinks, oh, it's not bad. I just know you like it. And I just want you to know I thought of you. That's why I bought it. Okay. So it's not because I'm grieving the loss of my best friend or whatever. So do interpret gestures for each other. If you can, if it feels safe enough, don't stay on the protector levels of attack or blame or anger. Go down a little bit. If it feels safe, and just say, I'm sorry I yelled, but I yelled because there's a part of me that felt really afraid that you might walk out on me like my dad did or my mom did or whoever else did. But that part was so scared because you wouldn't answer me, or you just isolate yourself to where I'm thinking, oh no, I'm going to lose this marriage too. So if it feels safe, do go down to that vulnerable level because it does build intimacy. But again, knowing full well, some couples don't feel safe with each other when it comes to emotional intimacy. That's why it's kind of be led by yourself, which is again your spirit. And if need be, seek help, professional help.
Yeah. Just so everyone is super clear, if you don't feel safe to go down those levels to feel intimate, to be vulnerable, definitely seek help of a therapist who can help cultivate a space that makes you feel more safe to be vulnerable. They can act as almost an interpreter between you and your spouse, that you know it doesn't sound like you're really understanding what she intended. What I think she intended was really this. So, Joan, do you think that, is that what you intended? Um,
Right.
to help cultivate that those skills so that you will eventually be able to feel safe without the intervention um, between you. Right. I want to thank you so much for being here. And as a reminder, go check out her book. I will link it in the show notes if you are wanting to get support as you navigate grief. But I also would recommend grabbing it anyway. And like we said in the episode, gather resources now when you are not in a crisis situation so that you can intentionally work on that intimacy and not try and build the boat in the middle of the ocean. So you can work on it when everything is calm and you guys can have calm and rational discussions together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much again for having me.
That was our conversation on crisis intimacy through the lens of grief. Grief will visit every marriage. It's not a matter of if, but when. The question is, will it pull you apart or will it pull you closer? Crisis intimacy is about choosing to reach for each other instead of retreat. It's about holding space for tears, honoring different grieving styles, and remembering that even when words fail, presence speaks. And the best way to make that possible is to talk about it now, before crisis comes, so that when it does, you already know how to lean in. If this episode gave you hope, share it with someone walking through loss and check the show notes for resources on all 13 types of intimacy. I'm Angela, the Christian Sexpert, and until next time, go have good sex. That's it for today's episode. You've been blessed and probably slightly scandalized. Now, go journal, go text your man, and most of all, don't keep this to yourself. Share it, review it, slide into my DMs. Then grab a journal, a game, or a coaching spot. And remember, Jesus didn't die for you to have boring sex. So go have good sex already.